Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. I want to welcome everyone into our live show. We're going to go ahead and break down and talk about really the most interesting issues in policing and some of the most important cases from the last couple weeks. Want to welcome everybody in. Curious to see where everyone is watching from. Looks like we have someone in from Holly, New York. We've got Daylight Disinfectant's got some interesting comments already. Oh, Crystal Stars is from Texas, Bloomfield, New Jersey, and Arizona. All right, thank you so much. It's good to see everybody in here today. So again, my name is Daniel. You can go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News, and make sure that you're subscribing to our channel here at Cops and Cons TV, because not only every week do we put out just interesting and raw police video and body camera video footage, but we do this live show every week on Fridays, usually around lunchtime. So definitely go ahead and follow us and subscribe to the channel so you know exactly when we're coming on. And again, one of my favorite things about this is as I'm going through some of these stories, if you want to go ahead and put in comments or questions, and one of the most interesting things is being able to go back and forth with our audience. Maybe you have some information that I don't, and we can go back and forth about some of these important and interesting cases. All right. Well, thank you. Daylight Disinfectant already liked and subscribed. Thank you so much. Sergeant George, good morning, good afternoon, happy birthday to the planet Earth. All right, so what we're going to get into first is, in the last, and we didn't do a show last week, so really we're going to go back a couple weeks, and something's been happening in the country, and I'm not really sure what's going on, but I think everyone pretty much knows what we're going to talk about, at least to start with, and there's been several different incidents where individuals had made mistakes, normal, common mistakes that everyone makes, like driving up to the wrong driveway, knocking on the wrong door, ringing the wrong doorbell, just normal, reasonable, innocent mistakes that everyone makes. And it seems like homeowners are overreacting and pulling out guns and getting into shootings with people. And I'm not sure what's going on. It's one of those things where I'm not sure if does this kind of stuff always happen, and I guess I want to say does this stuff always happen? And maybe it's typically just local news stories, but somehow this was picked up nationally. And it's happened even in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We're not going to talk about it specifically, but recently there's been 2 Uber Eats people who have been shot at. So does this kind of stuff happen all the time, and normally local stories instead of it being national? But I'm not really sure. But here's some of my initial thoughts about this. Listen, if someone knocks on your door or rings your doorbell, and for whatever reason you're scared or terrified, just don't answer the door, okay? That's what you should do. Or call the police. Or, you know what you should do? Look out the window and try to see who it is. Or just ignore it, because whoever's knocking at your door is probably just going to go away. Listen, I've been playing this game with Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses for decades, and I've always won, okay? That's the main thing to do, because think about it. How many times in your life has someone rang the doorbell or knocked on your door and they meant to do you harm? Almost zero. Maybe once in someone's life. It's a very rare thing, because in reality, most of us just aren't that important, aren't that controversial. It's probably not Walter White knocking at your door. So just because this is the most interesting thing to happen to you in the last month doesn't give you a license to shoot and kill someone for almost no reason. So we're going to get into the first case. And listen, there's 3 of these cases, and it's as hard as it is to believe. With every case, this is over a 10-day span. With every case, the set of facts and circumstances, and in my opinion, the behavior from the homeowners just gets worse. So the first case, and the narrative is really strange. The media narrative about these, one case really affected the other, and they all kind of strung together. Here's what I mean by this. So the first case happened on April 5th, this year, obviously, in Farmington, New Mexico. So maybe this one did hit the media. It was a national news story, but then since we had a couple of the other ones, it kind of went away a little bit. But this is really how this started. On April 4th, 2023, in Farmington, New Mexico, which is in the Four Corners area of the state. So here's what happened. So police officers were sent to a domestic violence call. So this wasn't police officers who were trying to do a warrant or were bored or were just randomly knocking on doors. No, someone called in that their neighbor was involved in a domestic dispute. So police officers had the address and they went to the call. Now this was at night. The address of the call, whatever street it was on, the numerical was 50 5308 is where they were supposed to go. But for some reason, we'll get into the reasons here in a minute, but for some reason, instead of going to 5308, they went to 5305, which is the wrong house. It's actually across the street from where they were supposed to be. So what the police officers did, just like they did in the Breonna Taylor case, they knocked and announced. They knocked and they announced Farmington police, and this is all on body camera footage. Again, not only do we have a body camera channel here, mostly, but we love the body camera footage because we can show exactly what the police officers did. Because a little tangent, if the police officers didn't knock in this case, we can guarantee 100% that no one would believe the police officers that they actually did knock and announce. Thankfully, it's on body camera footage. Police officers knocked on the door and they said Farmington police. They actually did that 3 different times in 86 seconds. So less than a minute and a half they did this. Now they're standing at the door and they start to have a conversation, so no one's coming to the door. So the police officers start to have a conversation amongst themselves about whether or not they're at the right address. So what they do is they get on the radio and they talk to dispatch and they ask the dispatcher to verify the address that they're supposed to be at. Now, they do this within about 90 seconds. This is pretty quick, so this is what we want police officers to do. So they get on scene, they knock and announce at the door, no one's answering, and almost immediately they go to dispatch to just try to verify that they're at the right place. So what the dispatcher was trying to figure it out, and what they decided to do is, hey, until we know for sure whether or not we at the right address, and I should point out that while on scene, there was a training officer and there was a rookie officer. A rookie officer is the one who basically pointed out that they were at the wrong address. So the rookie is the one who thought that they were at the wrong address. So what they do is after about 86 seconds, they actually back away from the front door. While they're trying to figure this out with the dispatcher, they actually back away from the front door and they start leaving. As they start to leave, they back away from the front door. The homeowner, 52-year-old Robert Dotson, he exits the house, and as he opens the door and exits the house, he's holding a handgun in his hand. And he doesn't just have it at his side, he doesn't have it holstered. He has the handgun, it's in his hand, it's out, and it's pointed in the direction of the police officers. One of the officers immediately, when seeing a handgun pointed in his direction, draws out, yells, "Hands up," and then police officers fire and they kill Mr. Dotson. Now, it turns out that they were at the wrong address. The house that they were supposed to go to was actually across the street. Now, let's talk about this. So let's look at the actions and let's break this down. Let's see what was reasonable and what reasonable. So let's start at the beginning when it comes to why would a police officer possibly go to the wrong address? Well, as we're going to see, this kind of thing actually happens all the time. Now, if this is a neighborhood where you have the addresses that are painted on the curb, or some other houses where it's like, a big stone thing where you have like a family crest and an address, and it's in the middle of the day, yeah, that would be really difficult to go to the wrong address. But in this case, here you are at night. The address is, a lot of times it's really difficult to see which address you're actually at. So this could happen to not only a police officer, but a pizza delivery driver, an Amazon driver, the mailman or mailwoman. This could happen all the time to all kinds of people. But when it comes to policing, let's talk about just some of the instances where a police officer might go to the wrong address. So when someone calls the police, they might give the 911 operator the wrong address. The 911 operator might write down or type in the wrong address. The 911 operator might give the dispatcher the wrong address. Or maybe the dispatcher has the right address but types in the wrong address. Then let's say everybody up to that point, the caller, the 911 operator, and the dispatcher all do everything correctly and have the correct address, but then it gets to the police officer. So now let's say the police officer types it into the GPS system wrong, because this is just the parlance of our times. This is just how things are. No one's driving around with paper maps all crazy. Every police officer that I'm aware with who doesn't know where they're going uses GPS. That's just the reality of it. I started in police work in 2005, and no, we weren't using GPS then, but 2009, 2010, maybe even a little earlier than that, 2008, yeah, at that point, we actually did go to where almost everybody was using GPS for addresses that they weren't familiar with. So let's say a police officer is supposed to go to 500 Cedar Southeast. Let's say that's what they type into their GPS. But no one ever goes to 500 Cedar Southeast, because 500 Cedar Northeast is a hospital or a restaurant, or that's been punched into Google GPS 1,000 times in the last couple days, whereas 500 Cedar South, or north, no one ever types that address in. So it's possible a police officer could even type in the right address, but maybe GPS sends them someplace else. Does that happen? Absolutely. Maybe when the police officer, they type in the the address correctly, but they get there and the house doesn't have a numerical number on it. Some houses, especially in like small towns like Farmington, some houses like literally don't have numbers on them. Or at night, like it's impossible to see from the street. So again, there's all these reasons why a police officer might go to a wrong address. Those are all unintentional. Now, sometimes police officers go to the wrong address and it's intentional. Here's what I mean by this. Let's say there's a call for service where there's a disturbance going on, and a police officer, before they go and they make contact with the individuals, sometimes they want to gather more information. So police officers all the time, on a regular basis, they knock on the doors of neighbors to try to get more information. Now, normally, this is seen as police officers being thorough, being competent, doing a good pre-investigation, so they have all kinds of information before they actually go contact people. So usually people think that police officers, that's put into the category of a police officer being thorough. So now, again, now this, obviously they didn't do this in Farmington, they didn't do this in intentionally go to the wrong address, but you could see a situation where they would have knocked on the wrong door because they had a question for the neighbor. It's not trespassing. It's not an unreasonable thing for a police officer to do. So let's get to Robert Dotson. So Robert Dotson, it was late at night. Let's say that he was sleeping, okay? So he's woken up by a knock at the door. Instead of just looking out the window to see that it was police officers, he comes out armed with a gun. Now, listen. Anytime at night you're answering the door, someone's at your door, I get grabbing a gun. I do that. If someone, it doesn't happen, again, this doesn't happen very often, but in the last 6 years I've lived at my house, we've had 2 different people ring the doorbell kind of late at night. Both times it was neighbors, but each time I went and I grabbed one of my guns and I had it at my side as I opened the door. That's a pretty reasonable thing. That's not an unreasonable thing for a person to do when they get a knock at the door kind of in the middle of the night. But what's unreasonable is to open the door fully and have a handgun out and pointed it wildly, like you're on SEAL Team 6 clearing the Bin Laden hideout. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Look out the window, see who it is, look out the peephole. But opening the door and just pointing it at anything that moves, I mean, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So now you have police officers who, yeah, they kind of have the feeling that they're at the wrong house, but now they're retreating from the house. They're going back probably to their cars or to someplace else to really try to figure out the correct address. But now all of a sudden the door swings open quickly and someone has a gun pointed in their direction. The idea that in that moment that police officers are going to shoot and use deadly force, of course that's reasonable. Because when you have a gun pointed at you, your life may only have moments left to it. There's no time to de-escalate. There's no time to have a conversation and figure things out. That isn't reasonable. So it's reasonable that the police officer shot. Now, as soon as this was over, the chief of police of Farmington, he did make a public apology, which is probably the correct thing for the police department to do. It's probably a reasonable thing for the police department to do, because to acknowledge, yeah, we went to the wrong address. Now, that's not the same thing. Now, that's the same thing as saying that it was an illegal or unlawful or against policy police shoot. Objectively, there was a gun pointed in the direction of police officers and they responded with deadly force. Again, that's a reasonable thing for the police officers to do. I cannot imagine a situation where the police officers are charged criminally in this case. They likely didn't even violate any policy. If you think that the police officers violated a policy, and again, it's okay to have different opinions on this, put it in the chat. I'm really curious to see what people think, if people think the police officers violated some policy or some law, or when a gun is pointed in their direction, they should have done something else. Now, what this is going to be is a civil case. So the family actually had a press conference, and they did alert that they are going to sue, which is reasonable, okay? Which is absolutely reasonable for them to do. They're going to file a lawsuit. Of course, the family wants second-degree murder charges against the police officers. I'm hoping that's not the case because, again, in order to say that you want second-degree murder charges, what you would have to say is that police officers committed something, going to the wrong house, which again can't happen. It's not illegal to do. It can happen. Delivery drivers do it all the time. Sometimes police officers knock at doors that aren't involved because they want more information from citizens. And again, normally that's considered police officers being thorough. Like I said, it wasn't intentional in this case, but it very well could have been. So this is going to be a civil case. I mean, we all know that's coming, and it's a far lower standard in civil court. But when it comes to whether or not policy or law was violated, I don't see anything. What should a police officer do when there was a gun pointed at them? Like I said, if you have something else that a police officer should do, I'm really curious. Put it in the chat. But it seems that the shooting was objectively reasonable. Daylight Disinfected says the city will settle. I think that's a fair assessment. Daylight Disinfecting. Yeah, and like I said, the police chief has already publicly apologized for what the police officers did. Let's see, Steve Ladner. I haven't talked to Steve in a while. Let's see. A man sleeping in the back bedroom would not have heard them say police officers. I agree with you, Steve. And listen, the thing is, I'm not saying that he did hear and he purposely went outside. Steve, let's assume that he didn't know that it was police officers. But what I'm saying is. But what I'm saying, Steve, is that, whether or not it was police officers or not, if you exit your door like that, you're putting who's ever at the door in a situation where they have a gun pointed at them. Again, it could have been a pizza delivery guy who went to the wrong address who now has a gun pointed at them. So again, that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In short, it's a bad idea. Look out the window. Look at the people. If you're not sure who's there, if you're not sure who your target is, why are you pointing a gun? Again, it's a bad idea. It's an objectively bad idea, and these are the consequences. No shoes. Someone says end qualified immunity. Anyone who says end qualified immunity doesn't truly understand qualified immunity. But definitely, we are here to educate. We have a whole bunch of different videos on it if you go back and check. Okay, so we're going to the same person who wants to end qualified immunity. Let's see. Says he can do what the hell he wants on his property. Yeah, he can. And if you point a gun at someone, they might defend themselves. All right, let's see. Lazy Chemistry says if a police officer has a gun pointed at them, they have full liberty to shoot back, kill if necessary. Yeah, I agree. They have to stop the threat. Null Entity says the videos that I have seen, the houses were clearly marked as the wrong address. Yeah, and again, that happened. So. Yeah, and Null Entity, yeah, and it seems like they realized they were at the wrong address in 86 seconds. And within 86 seconds, they actually left the porch and they started to walk back to their car. So yeah, so the police officers made a mistake again, which hundreds, thousands of people make around the country for a lot of different reasons, and they actually realized their mistake in 86 seconds and started walking away. Yeah, so that absolutely does happen. Let's see. Daylight says, what if the cops stay in the street and use the intercom to say, police come to the door? Well, Daylight, that's a really good thing, but this was just a regular domestic violence call that happens all the time. So you would think that waking up, so every time that there's a call for service, which, police department the size of Farmington. So Farmington, New Mexico has, I don't know, somewhere between 50 and 100,000 people. I think they probably have 60 or 70 police officers. Maybe they get 10 domestic violence calls a night. So 10 times a night, if it's nothing felony, nothing serious, nothing like, there's an armed person shooting people or anything like that, if it's a regular domestic violence call, which, most of the time those don't even end in arrest. So I probably should call it domestic dispute call. Most of the time, those don't even end in arrest. The idea that you're going to get on a loudspeaker, wake up the entire neighborhood, that would piss people off pretty quick. So now if there's a felon who's inside barricaded, yes, police officers do use those kinds of tactics, Daylight, but not for every call for service. Let's see. If we have, last comment, my name is, after watching numerous cop watch and First Amendment auditor videos, I would say you accomplished very little for all the trouble you caused. Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Let's see. Okay, all right. So that's going to be a civil case. Obviously, no one wants anyone to die. This is a tragedy because someone who was home in their house, really not bothering anyone, did die. But when we look at if it was criminal by the police officers or not, it doesn't seem like that's the case. Now we get to Ben Crump. So Ben Crump, everyone knows attorney Ben Crump. He's kind of a grifter who goes around and race baits all around the country. So Ben Crump commented on Twitter when this happened. And even though Ben Crump hasn't been retained for this case, obviously, but what Ben Crump said is that there was no excuse. I quote his Twitter. He said there was no excuse that the police officers went to the wrong address. So just remember that. So Ben Crump is on record, and I screenshotted it, his Twitter, saying that when someone goes to the wrong address, there's, in his words, no excuse. Keep that in mind. Next case we're going to talk about, because this is extremely relevant. This goes to about 6 or 7 days later. So April 13th of this year in Kansas City, there was a 16-year-old kid named Ralph Yarl. Ralph is a musician in his school. It seems like he comes from a really good family, a reasonable kid, good kid, not in any kind of trouble. His mother asked him to go pick up his 11-year-old siblings at about 10 o'clock at night. Now, Ralph, I don't think he'd ever been to this house before where his siblings were at. And the address that his mother told him to go to, the numerical, was 115th Street. So, well, Ralph went to 115th Street Terrace. So really a house that had the same numerical, 115th, same numerical, in the same neighborhood, but instead of street, it was terrace. And most of us know kind of how these streets are. You know, it'll have like the number of the street and stuff like that. And a lot of times, avenue, street, lane, terrace, a lot of times that's in smaller letters. So again, that's reasonable for anyone to make that mistake. A police officer, a delivery driver, Pizza Hut, mail people, UPS, a 16-year-old teenager who's never been there before. Yeah, it's a reasonable mistake that someone might make. And I'm going to say this a couple times throughout the day. Going to the wrong address unintentionally, that's not a crime. And you know what? It's not a character flaw. Okay, doesn't mean that you're a bad person because you went to the wrong address. Ralph Yarl was not a bad person because he went to the wrong address. That isn't anything that is criminal in nature. So what Ralph did is he went to the door and he rang the doorbell, thinking he was going to pick up his 11-year-old siblings. Inside the house was an 84-year-old man named Arnold Lester. Arnold, this was 10 o'clock at night. He's 84 years old. He was sleeping, so he was woken up by the doorbell. So Mr. Lester, he wakes up, he grabs his gun, and again, Mr. Lester does something very similar, only worse. Because I said, as I'm going to go through these cases, the behavior of the homeowners just keep getting worse as I'm going through. So what the homeowner does is, here's what it seems like, and more information is going to come out on this, obviously. But what it seems like happened is that Mr. Lester opened the main door, the big door, and there was still a screen door or like a storm door in between. It's common in the Midwest. We don't have them here where I'm at in the Southwest, but in the Midwest, we all have screen doors. It seems like he shot at Ralph Yarl through the screen door. He struck him in the head. As Ralph was on the ground, Mr. Lester shot at him one more time and hit him in the arm. Now, thankfully, Ralph Yarl was able to get up and run away. He was able to run 3 houses down and get some help from a neighbor. Ambulances came. The good news, we'll go with the good news. The good news is that it seems like he's going to recover. Now, I'm sure he's going to have some injuries. I'm sure there's going to be some lasting stuff, but he's actually been on some phone calls with people. He's been invited to the White House. I guess what I'm saying is it's like yes, of course he's going to have some lasting injuries, but he's alive, and hopefully he is going to mostly be okay. In this case, yeah. Now, there is some dispute. There is some factual dispute from Ralph Yarl and from Mr. Lester about what happened. Some of those disputes are Mr. Lester said that not only did Ralph Yarl knock, but he also was jiggling at the door. Ralph Yarl said that he only rang the doorbell. Now, we don't know what happened. So the facts... All of these facts, this is going to be for a jury to decide because Mr. Lester appropriately was charged with a crime. So all of this is going to be for a jury to decide, who they believe on what the actual facts are. But here's what we do know. Here's what we can say is that Ralph Yarl, he was unarmed. He had no intent to hurt Mr. Yarl, and he was there to pick up 11-year-olds, his 11-year-old siblings. Now, is it possible? Now, again, we don't know this. I'm just going to speculate. Is it possible that he rang the doorbell and then opened the storm door and tried to knock on the main door? So I'm not saying Ralph Yarl did that. That hasn't come in. But if Ralph Yarl did that, that's completely reasonable. That's something as a kid I would do all the time. As a police officer, that's something that I would do, because sometimes you ring the doorbell and from the outside, you can't tell if the doorbell actually worked. So many times you open up that screen door or storm door, which most of the time that's not locked, and then you knock on the main door to try to get someone's attention if you're not sure the doorbell worked. Again, that's not criminal. That's a completely reasonable thing for someone to do. And again, I'm not saying Ralph Yarl did that, but if he did, that would be reasonable. It would also explain, so if you hear that storm door opening, is it possible that Mr. Lester thought that it was someone who was trying to open up the other door? Sure, he's 84, he's old, he probably doesn't hear all that good. I mean, we know what 84-year-olds are like. Look at Joe Biden. We know what the cognition of 84-year-olds is like. Okay, through no fault of their own, they're not all there. They may not be all there, and it's at night. So even if you're 22 years old, when it's at night and you're woken up and you're kind of groggy, you may not have, all your faculties may not be there. So we have the age, we have the time at night, and the fact that he was asleep. So is it possible that he thought? Yes, I mean, it's possible. However, again, what should you do if someone is knocking at your door or ringing your doorbell and for some reason you are scared or terrified? Call the police. Look out the window, look out the peephole, see who it is. What you don't do is start shooting through a door at someone who is unarmed just standing there. That's absolutely insane. The charges are absolutely appropriate for this case. So he was charged because Ralph Yarl thankfully survived, some type of an aggravated assault type charge. He was charged and he was released. So he'll be on some kind of a pre-prosecution detention while the trial is going on. Now we get to Ben Crump, who I do believe is involved in this case, along with the local attorney. And Ben Crump said this, and he said this. So I agree that charges should be filed against Mr. Lester. I don't have any problem with that. However, before we knew all the facts, so before we know what we know today, before Mr. Lester, before they even knew the identity, and the reason we know that is because Ben Crump put out a tweet that said the unknown offender, the unnamed offender. So at the time that he made this tweet, Ben Crump literally didn't know who the offender was, had no idea about him. He said that he wanted charges filed against the homeowner. So let's do this, which I agree with, but let's take this, let's see if we're logically consistent. Because you know what, when you're looking at people, if they're not logically consistent, you know that they just aren't honest arbiters of going over current event and news. When people aren't honest, what Ben Crump does is he'll look at cases and he'll look at the race of the person and the job title of the person. And based on a combination of very complicated equation of a very complicated formula of job title and race, he'll decide who he wants charges to be filed against and who's at fault, when reasonable people should look at the facts of the case to decide. Because in this case, just like in the Farmington police case, I think the homeowner was incorrect both times. So one had the police officers ringing the wrong doorbell, and one had a 16-year-old black kid ringing the wrong doorbell. In my mind, the homeowner was incorrect in both of those cases. The race of the individuals involved or the job title, police officer, I don't think has anything to do with it. But so it isn't logically consistent. But it's almost like I've never seen a narrative change so fast, right? Because we went from saying police officers rang the wrong doorbell, I quote, no excuse, to the next time Ralph Yarl rings the wrong doorbell. Now, there's no fault to the person who rang the wrong doorbell, and it's 100% on the homeowner. Again, it's not logically consistent, and I just hope that I'm not the only one who sees these lies about current events in real time. But the narrative changed so fast. From police officers are trespassing, some people even said that they deserve to be shot because they went to the wrong address. Okay, well then when it happens to Ralph Yarl, you can't make that same argument. And you are forced to be honest, at least about that case, that it's unreasonable for the homeowner to act in that manner. I think that's the case for both of those individuals. All right, let's see if we have some comments on this case. Officer Blue Gun, good to see you. The news is way scarier. Daylight Disinfectant says, I'm not sure I agree. The trespasser had a responsibility to take reasonable care. Okay, I'm not sure which case we are talking about. Let's see. Sergeant George says homeowners are usually in the wrong on these cases. Yes. Let's see. Milkmaid's kid, too bad. The bad things happen. Okay. Let's see. Ego 10, well, we know you're vulnerable to home invasions. Ego 10, I don't, because I opened the door and looked through the peephole with a gun in my hand, but I don't have it pointed at people. I also have 2 giant Great Pyrenees dogs that are going to do more damage than any of my guns probably. So I don't think I'm vulnerable, but okay. Let's see. Milkman says scary and incomplete most always. The news is yes, absolutely. Okay, so I think a lot of people are kind of seeing this the same way, which I think is reasonable. So now we're, like I said, this was a series of 3 different cases. So now we're going to go to 2 days later to 4/15. So now we're literally 10 days from when the Farmington police officer case happened. 2 days after Ralph Yarl's case. This is Kailyn Gillis. This happened on 4/15 of this year in upstate New York. Now, what Kailyn did, her and her friends made the absolute horrible mistake of driving up the wrong driveway. So I think it was 2 or 3 cars and 1 motorcycle. Kailyn Gillis and her friends were trying to, this is rural upstate New York. Now, I've never been to rural upstate New York, but what I hear is that it's kind of like mountainy and woodsy and, it's rural. I'm not, it's a rural area. It's not New York City. So I think we've seen pictures of this case. So pictures of the area where this happened. And yeah, it looks like it's kind of like a country kind of area. There's not a lot of houses and stuff like that. So, and in fact, in this case is that, and we'll get to it in a second, but Kailyn and her friends didn't even have cell phone service. So imagine that at least the police officers and Ralph Yarl, at least they had the option to use their cell phones, to use GPS, to do all these things. It seems like Kailyn and her friends didn't have cell phone service, so it's unknown if they would even be able to know where they were going. But they were trying to find a friend's house. And the way these driveways are, there's these like long winding driveways. So, and this was at night, and unfortunately, they drove up the wrong driveway. It was either 1 or 2 cars and then also someone on a motorcycle. So they drive up the driveway of the wrong house. It's objectively the wrong house. So they get there and they all kind of stop. Now the reports are that no one actually exits the cars. No one gets out. They don't start walking around. They don't even ring the doorbell, which again wouldn't be illegal. People go to the wrong house all the time. It's not a character flaw, okay? But they didn't even do that. It seems like as soon as they pulled up, they got to the end of the driveway, they saw the house, they realized that it wasn't the right house. Now, what they probably tried to do is they probably tried to talk to each other and say, oh, okay, this is the wrong house. Where should we go? Well, maybe it's 2 down. Maybe it's that way. That's a reasonable conversation you could see people having while they don't have cell phone service, right? So it's not like they can just call each other as they're driving down the driveway. Like, that's the only way that they were able to communicate right there, to figure out and to kind of confer this actually is the wrong house. So what they did is they talked. They had a conversation and they went back and they started to drive away. As they were driving away, 65-year-old homeowner Kevin Monahan, he comes out on his porch and he fires a couple shots at the vehicles as they're driving away. Unfortunately, one of the rounds did strike Kailyn Gillis, who was a 20-year-old. She was a passenger in the vehicle in one of the cars, and she was a passenger in one of the cars, and it's like an Always Sunny where it's like, so anyway, I started blasting. Kids drove up on my driveway and they turned around. So anyways, I started blasting. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. I would make the argument that I think most people are going to agree with, that this homeowner was in the least danger. That's why I said these cases keep getting worse. This homeowner, well, let me get back to Kailyn. So Kailyn was unfortunately struck because there wasn't any cell phone service. They couldn't call for an ambulance right there. So her boyfriend did drive her down the driveway. driveway, just to the main road. They actually had to drive about 6 miles until they were in cell phone range. They got EMS there. Unfortunately, the injury she sustained was a fatal injury, and she did pass away. I would argue that the shooter, the homeowner, Kevin Monahan, he was in less danger than the homeowner at Farmington Police, certainly in less danger than Mr. Lester, who shot Ralph Yarl, because no one was at his door. Again, it's not illegal to ring the wrong doorbell on accident. Not illegal. Doesn't mean that you're threatening anybody. But these kids, these young people, they didn't even get out of the car. They weren't walking around his house. They didn't even go up to the door. So again, the idea, it's even true for police officers. That's why most police departments have policies that if someone is in a vehicle, you're not supposed to shoot at a moving car, because people are in objectively less immediate danger if someone is in a car. Now, you have a case where they're driving away. So even if you think for some reason, I am high up on my porch, I'm on the second floor, people in a car, okay, there's no danger there. When the cars turn around and start driving away, that's literally what you want them to do. If you don't want them on your property, watching them drive away and leave, that's literally what you want to happen. So to shoot at that point is absolutely insane. So, yeah, that's absolutely crazy. So yeah, he has been charged. He did not get bail, which I think is correct. So he has been charged in her murder. He absolutely should be. Again, of all three cases we talked about, this is to me the least justifiable case. Null Entity says a random person accidentally ringing your doorbell is very different than a cop banging at your door and demanding you come out for no reason. Null Entity, well, I'm not sure. Who demanded that they come out. So if we go to the Farmington case, they knocked on the door and they yelled Farmington police. They knocked and announced, which again, just like they did in the Breonna Taylor case, that's what the police officers are supposed to do. They're supposed to knock and announce. At no point, it's on body camera video. I'm not making this up because I think it's fun. At no point did the police officers knock on the door, threaten who's ever inside the house, yell, you need to come out now or else. No, they knocked on the door. So the police officers knocked on the door and yelled Farmington police. Literally what we want police officers to do, because if you're a police officer and you're knocking on a door, it's reasonable that you want people to know who you are, and people can decide, people have that right, to decide whether or not they want to open the door or not. That's how it is. Let's see. Someone says all illegal police stops cases for civil rights. That's a good quote. Radic says, are all illegal police stops cases for civil rights violations? Well, probably. So any kind of Radic, so any kind of a stop or a detention from a police officer is a detention. Police have to meet certain legal thresholds in order to even temporarily take away your freedom. Now, when it comes to civil rights violations, I guess it could be. Now, let's say a police officer stops you because of some a traffic stop, because they run your license plate. They think that your license plate is expired. But let's say they accidentally typed in the wrong license plate, okay? And they detain you for 45 seconds before they figure it out. Well, are you going to be able to file a lawsuit because they detained you for 45 seconds and then said, hey, I'm sorry, it was the wrong plate? No, because the level of damage isn't great. Now, if they charge you with a crime and they falsely arrest you, if that's malicious, yes, then absolutely, of course. So really, you have to look at it. There's a couple different factors. The length of the detention, and really a lot of it is, did the police officers do something reasonable, or were they doing something with malice? Were they trying to be rude and a jerk, and were they trying to violate your rights because they're just bad people? Or did they make an honest mistake, and instead of hitting a K on their computer, they hit an L and it came back expired, they stopped you, and then they let you go? So it kind of just depends. Let's see. Daylight Disinfected, Cops and Cons, what are your opinions on the no-knock warrant? Oh, Daylight, why do you have such good questions? We'll do no-knock warrants really quick. I think no-knock warrants, I think no-knock warrants should be a thing sometimes. I'm okay with cities and municipalities and police departments coming up with policies that no-knock warrants should only be used for people who are shown to be violent towards police officers. I'm good with that. I think that's reasonable. So when you say we're not going to do no-knock warrants no matter what, I don't think that's a big deal. I think that's a bad idea. I'm going to give you an example before we move on here, Daylight. So let's look at the Breonna Taylor case, okay? So in this case, police officers in the Breonna Taylor case, her boyfriend who is inside the apartment and the police officers outside, let's go where they agree on. They all agree that the police officers knocked, right? They knocked. knocked. Let's say even Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, said, yeah, the police officers knocked. In fact, they knocked so loud that they woke us up. We got dressed, and they were able to arm themselves with a gun and go into the hallway, right? So this is a case where the police officers knocked. There's a dispute on whether or not they yelled police or not, so we don't have to get into that, but everyone agrees that they knocked. My argument on the Breonna Taylor case is, what if the police officers did a no-knock warrant? What if they didn't knock? What if they just busted in the door, they did a no-knock warrant? They likely would have got Breonna and her boyfriend in custody and contained before any shots were fired, because that's the thing of a no-knock warrant. You go in quick before anyone knows what happens, and most of the time it's actually safer statistically for police officers and for individuals, occupants inside of a house, because people don't have enough time to, again, get dressed, start thinking about what's going on, arm themselves with a gun. So, again, I don't think police officers should always do no-knock warrants, of course. But if it's someone who is known to be violent, if someone is violent, okay, I'm going to do one more scenario here. So when it comes to no-knock warrants, so there was a case in St. Paul, Minnesota. Can't remember the kid's name. It'll come to me probably when I'm talking. But there was a no-knock warrant, and he was actually killed by police officers just about a year ago. Well, this kid had why did I say kid? He was like 18 or 19 years old. This guy had a warrant for all kinds of stuff, stealing cars, property theft. So he had a warrant out for his arrest. And then he was actually wanted for a murder. So I remember that he murdered a random 35-year-old guy who was just in the neighborhood, I think, picking up his kids. So I can't remember this kid's name. I said it'll come to me as I'm going through it. This was last year in St. Paul, Minnesota. The Minneapolis Police Department was assisting on this. But so they had a warrant for this guy for all kinds of property crimes, drug crimes, and he had a warrant for a homicide, right? Oh, Amir Locke, Officer Blue Gun, how come you're the best? I just need you to answer that question. Why are you the best? Yeah, Amir Locke. So Amir Locke was actually the individual who was killed by police officers. It was his cousin, I think it was like Melky Speed or something like that, I think his name is, I believe. Anyway, so this was April 6th of last year. I think his name was like Melky Speed is the guy who had the warrant. Anyways, so he had this warrant. Okay, so you have a warrant, so you have property crimes, drug crimes, and a murder. That's what this guy has a warrant for. Okay, so I think we can all objectively say we want the police officers to get this person into custody. Hopefully we're all on the same page there. Okay, so now we get to the point, how do we want police officers to try to get this person into custody? Well, in this case, what they did is they tried to do a traffic stop. They were going to stop him in the car, and when they stopped him, they were going to arrest him. Okay, that seems reasonable. Well, they tried 3 different times, but you know what this guy did? Every time the police officers tried to stop him, he fled. He fled, and the police officers made the decision, we don't want to get into a high-speed chase, because that's not just dangerous for him, for police. Most importantly, high-speed chases are dangerous for the community, random people at large. So 3 times the police officers tried to get this guy into custody with traffic stops. He fled. Now, the last time that he fled police officers, he pulled out a gun and he started shooting at police officers as he was fleeing. Okay, so now we have a situation. We have someone who's wanted for all kinds of crimes, including a homicide. He's ran from police 3 different times, and the last time he shot at police. Now, is it reasonable that police officers, okay, we're going to try something else, right? So they do surveillance. They find out that he is that he may be at an apartment that's owned by his cousin, his cousin, Amir Locke, lives there. Now, you're a police officer, you're a manager of a police department. What do you think police officers should do? Should they knock on the door and say, police, we're the police, please come to the door? Now, to me, that's crazy, because he's already shot a gun at police officers. That's nuts. And in fact, it's irresponsible. Imagine a situation where you have someone, the police officers have information, they know he already shot at us once. So if you knock and announce as police, 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 and let's say there's a shooting and someone dies, what the dishonest anti-police critics, what they're going to say is, hey, you know this guy is violent. Like, you know that he wants to shoot with police officers, so you knocked and announced all crazy because you were trying to incite him to do something, so you got to give you an excuse for killing him. So we know that's what they would say. But in this situation, it's reasonable. After they've tried these other things, okay, well, now we're going to go to a no-knock warrant because he's shown to be violent, specifically violent, not just towards the person he killed, but violent towards law enforcement. So the idea that in that case that you are going to the idea that in that case that you are going to do a no-knock warrant, to me, it's reasonable. All right. Now, unfortunately, as they went into the police officer, the no-knock warrant, Amir Locke happened to be in the house with the person they were looking for. He reached for a gun and police officers killed him. So obviously, we don't want anyone innocent to die, right? But the idea that you should take no-knock warrants off the table just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Sergeant George says, note to self, taking away a police officer's ability to perform a traffic stop is a bad idea. Traffic stops are one of the key elements in law enforcement. Yeah, agree. Daylight disinfectant. That was a really good question. Thank you. Let's see. The case will save lives. Yeah. So again, no-knock warrants aren't always appropriate, but I mean, we have a real-life example where I think it was appropriate to do. And maybe there are people who think that it's not appropriate to do. I'm good with that. I'm good with different opinions. In fact, I want to hear other opinions, and I want to hear why. I want to hear why you want police officers to do something else, if that's the case, because I think that's where the interesting conversations are. Ryan Holzer, take away the Terry stop. I'm not sure why you want to take away a Terry stop. Ryan, do you know what a Terry stop is? A Terry stop, you basically have to have reasonable suspicion that someone is armed and dangerous. If you have reasonable suspicion that someone is armed and dangerous, police officers can search for a weapon. So again, if there's no reasonable suspicion that you're armed and dangerous, then then police officers can't do that. So now police officers shouldn't do illegal Terry stops. But again, if it's, I don't really see a problem with that. If anything, all this does is it lowers the incidence of violence between individuals and police, which is a goal I think we should all have. All right. Okay. So the next case that we're going to talk about is, I just heard about this in the last 24 hours or so. Maybe I was out of it, but I just heard about this last case in the 24 hours, and it's not exactly the same kind of a case that we talked about with the first three, but it's in the ballpark of being, someone being unreasonable when it comes to a shooting. So this happened in Gaston County, North Carolina. What happened is there was an individual. She's 6 years old. Her name is Kinsley White, and her parents are William and Ashley. So Kinsley and her friends were playing with a basketball in front of Ryan Holzer. You can say it's an invasion of the Fourth Amendment. I get that's your opinion, but that's not what the courts have said. So I guess we can agree to disagree. But the courts have not found it to be an invasion of the Fourth Amendment. So Kinsley White, her parents, William and Ashley, were involved in this case with their neighbor. And I didn't write down the neighbor's name. I can't believe. Oh, yes, I did. Robert Louis Singletary. Robert Louis Singletary is the neighbor. And it's been reported by other neighbors that a couple different times that anytime a baseball, basketball, or just normal things that kids do goes onto his property or in his yard or near his house, that he yells and screams and he gets all crazy with the neighborhood kids. So what happened is Kinsley and her friends were outside playing, and a basketball went into his front yard. The kids went to retrieve the basketball, and instead of what a normal person would do, okay, there's a 6-year-old getting a basketball from my yard, go back to doing what you're doing like a normal adult human, right? But Robert Louis Singletary, no, that's not him. He doesn't roll like that. He gets out and starts screaming at the kids. Well, he starts screaming and yelling at the kids, I guess, as he had done before. So what happened was the kids went back. They told the parents what happened. So, of course, like a reasonable, good parent might do, it seems like William and Ashley went over there and pretty much said, dude, like, why are you yelling and screaming at kids, causing a disturbance about a basketball going into your yard? Like, that's absolutely crazy. During this dispute, Robert Louis Singleton, he pulled out a gun and he started shooting. Not just shooting at the dad, not just shooting at the mom, but he also shot at Kinsley. It's been reported that the dad, William, actually shielded Kinsley. She was grazed with a bullet in the face. The mother was grazed with a bullet, and the father, William, he suffered critical injuries. He's still trying to recover, but he suffered some pretty serious injuries. Robert Louis Singleton. So those are pretty shocking facts, right? Like, this isn't something that normally happens. Pretty shocking facts to this case. But you know what's not shocking? This guy has a long and violent criminal history. So going back to a couple months ago, December of last year, December of 22, he was involved in a domestic dispute with his girlfriend. What he did is he allegedly, because the case is still pending, he allegedly beat her with a mini sledgehammer and held her against her will inside his home for over 2 hours. He was charged with kidnapping and assault, and he was actually, which are pretty serious felonies, and he was released on $250,000 bond. So what a lot of us are going to say is, why is this guy even out? Why is he even out? Okay, so the charges were serious enough to give him a $250,000 bond. So why was he even out? Secondly, so he's on probation, not probation, like pretrial services, where you would think he has a lot of different conditions. So the way this works is, instead of being in jail while the trial is pending, the judge basically says, okay, we're going to let you be out so you can work, you can live your life, you can do your thing, but there's some restrictions. You can't drink alcohol. You can't do illegal drugs. You can't associate with criminals. You can't contact any of the victims. And one of those conditions almost always is you cannot possess weapons. So, it's not a law, but, it's an order from the court that he likely wasn't supposed to possess any kind of weapons. So this is what we talk about. We don't have to talk about gun control now, but this is when we say, like, bad people who are going to commit crimes, they don't give a shit about gun control laws. Good people do. Bad people like Robert Louis Singletary don't. All right. So he wasn't even supposed to have a gun. He had felonies pending, and so that, again, when you do something like this, you shoot people in this kind of scenario, no one is surprised when you look back and you see, yeah, this guy's got a pretty serious violent history. No one is surprised by that fact. Then, incomplete, just to get the full picture of this guy, if that wasn't cowardly enough, he fled. He fled North Carolina, but thankfully for us and for law enforcement, he's actually better at shooting 6-year-old girls than he is at hiding from police, because he was apprehended last night in Florida. So he was apprehended last night, and he will face charges for this shooting, which is, gonna go. Obviously, that's gonna violate his conditions of release for the other felony, and yeah, he'll face some pretty serious felonies here. And he should be a dead man walking in prison, because when you shoot a 6-year-old kid, people take that pretty seriously, even in prison, as they absolutely should. So those are the cases that we were going to talk about. Before we wrap up, I'm going to get to some of your comments. Officer Blue Gun, let's see what we got here. Oh, goodness. Okay. So I think Officer Blue Gun was talking about the Fourth Amendment, and he said, how can it be an invasion of the Fourth Amendment? Is there a reasonable suspicion based on specific facts that you can articulate? Officer Blue Gun, I agree with you. And the thing is, the courts agree as well. So if the courts find that is an invasion of the Fourth Amendment, we can have that discussion. But as far as I'm concerned, it's settled law. So Sergeant George says the father was definitely the hero for trying to shield his daughter and wife. Sergeant George, you're always right on these things. I agree with you 100%. That father absolutely is a hero for doing that. Put himself at risk, and he still has critical injuries. Hopefully he survives, but he's looking not great right now. Let's see. I think therefore I am. He's out because of allegedly. Okay, not sure. Megan Kidd says Steve Ladner, absolutely. Home Alone. Okay, let's see. What other comments do we have? Sergeant George says, not a smart move on the part of the judge to let Robert Louis Singletary out to begin with, without the need to look at his track record. I agree with you 100%. I'm going to go on the record and say that he shouldn't have been out. Maybe this is controversial, but if you have 1 or 2 felonies on your record and then you're arrested again, and I'm not just saying like, someone randomly accused you of something, but we have like a good witness, a good believable witness, and it's reasonable and objectively reasonable to think that you battered someone with a mini sledgehammer and held them against their will. Yeah, I'm good with you being held in jail. I'm 100% good with that. I think most of us are. Daylight says, non sequitur, concealed carry. If I get pulled over, should I tell the officer I'm carrying? Daylight, again, God, you got all the good questions today. I would say yes. As a police officer, anytime someone told me that they had a gun, and the state that I worked in is a very gun-friendly state, so everybody has a gun, but anytime someone told me that they were carrying a firearm, I always appreciated it. But again, maybe not all police officers would appreciate it, but I always appreciated it. I always thought it was nice when someone told me they were armed. I took it as a sign of mutual respect. Also, when I've been off duty carrying and I've been pulled over. Every time I've told the officer who stopped me that I was carrying a firearm as well, and I've always had good outcomes from that. So again, that's just my personal opinion. Officer Blue Gun, it feels like the toothpaste is out of the tube on that one. I agree. Let's see. I am therefore I am. Why are we talking about physically harming someone that is mentally unwell? She should be institutionalized. Okay, not sure which case that we're talking about. But if someone is mentally unstable to stand trial, yeah, they should be institutionalized. I'm good with that. And I don't think anyone is saying he should be physically harmed. I think we're saying this is probably what's going to happen in prison, based on things that we know about the reality of being in prison and being there for harming a child. I don't want anyone, I'm not calling for physical violence against anyone. I'm just saying that, like, this is typically what we've heard from people who have been in prison, from corrections officers. All this stuff is on the record. If you are charged with certain crimes, typically the other inmates don't treat you very well. Shooting a 6-year-old kid is typically in that category. I don't want anything. What I want for Robert Louis Singletary, I want him to be safe in jail. I'm good with protective solitary custody, not harmed at all, and I want him to stand trial. I want him to stand trial, and I want him to spend the rest of his life in jail. That's what I want, and I want that life to be long. Okay, that's what I think he deserves. All right, well, that's going to be our show for today. So next week, I just want to kind of prep everyone. I'm going to talk about the Daniel Perry case. So the Daniel Perry case, this was during the Black Lives Matter protests in Austin. Daniel Perry shot someone as he was in his car. Individual's name is Garrett Foster, who was holding an AK-47. So we're going to get into that case because that case went to court last week. I've got a lot to say on that case. So if you have any thoughts, opinions on the Daniel Perry case, definitely come armed with them next week because we're going to talk about that and get into it. Daylight Disinfectant, good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Officer Blue Gun, you too, Sergeant George, all of our regulars, thank you so much for being in here. Again, my name is Daniel. You can go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News over on YouTube and Substack and TikTok and everywhere else. I do daily content, but most importantly, please make sure that you are subscribing to Cops and Cons TV, like and share our videos, and as many people as you can share the channel with, we would appreciate it. That's going to be the show for today. I really hope that everyone has a great and safe weekend. Thank you.